months ago, we were at Minocqua, Wisconsin, Sons of Norway, and did this program. Immediately after the program, a lady said, "Were you born in Milwaukee?" And I said, "Yes." "Are you the only son in your family?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Was your mother named Edna?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "When I was 10, you teased me." I didn't remember it. I'm wearing a sweater that's got runic on it, and it was made by my wife. She can tell you more about the sweater.
That's not strictly true. I designed it, and my sister knit it. I had seen a sweater like this that a friend had made for her husband. This was some years ago, and I thought, oh, what a perfect retirement gift for Ron. He likes runes. He studied about runes, and that would be marvelous. But like I said, I don't knit, so it's a little bit of a problem. How are we going to do this? But I asked my sister if I designed it, would she knit it? And oh, yes, she loves projects, and she has knit at least 15 Norwegian sweaters for her family. So
only wool from Norway.
And she said, I only knit with wool from Norway. But fortunately, she was going to Norway that summer, so we designed it, and she figured out how much wool she'd need, and so she bought the wool there. And Ron is, as you might have heard, half Norwegian and half Irish. And so this is his, no, it's this way. This is his Norwegian side, and the stave church is sort of the symbol of Norway, and the Celtic cross, the symbol of Ireland. And then here it's got St. Olaf, and here it's got St. Patrick. And then on the next line down, it has our ancestral names, you know, of our grandparents' last names. It goes all the way around. And the next line down has, and now I'll show you the back, because that has Ron's name right here, and then his dad and his dad's parents, his mother and his mother's parents. And then this says Frida in runes, and then my parents on each side and grandparents. And that, I'll tell you the bottom later. The thing that unites Ireland and Norway is the Viking ship. And so that's what we have here. And then this is maybe the only word you can read. It says O Nowlan in the original Celtic spelling of Ron's Nowlan, Irish Nowlan name. The bottom row has all of our children and grandchildren and in-laws that we had at that time. There's some missing now. Now, okay, then on the Norwegian sleeve, my friend had just done random letters, and I thought, well, that's no fun. So what would you put on a Norwegian sleeve? If you wanted to have something that the sleeve would handle, but that's about all. We chose to put the table prayer that many of us grew up with, Iasunam Gorvita Bors. And there's still a little bit space down here, so we put Takvaralt, which you see on many Norwegian gravestones. So then what would you put on the Irish arm?
Table prayer too, then?
Yeah, except we didn't know any. Yes, the classic Irish blessing, may the road rise to meet you, may the wind be always at your back. And so that's the story of the, we call it the heritage sweater. And whenever we do a program remotely related to Vikings, we get to talk about it. And for those of you who are knitters and want to know more about it, I have a little photo album that has pictures of the process that you might like to look at. Now on to the program that you came to see.
Why did I go to Ireland? I went to Ireland for several reasons. Number one, I had tracked my relatives in Norway on a little seaport town in Norway, and I asked and met some first cousins of my mom, and I was able to ask them, how come I'm so dark? I was born a Svet Norski, and a black Norwegian. Mom said, if it had been at a hospital, I would have rejected you. But since it was at home, I had no choice. I was the only baby, and she was the only new mother. So I finally get to ask these Norwegians, why am I not blonde and blue-eyed? And they went off in a corner talking Norwegian and looked at me every once in a while. And then Knut came out and he patted me on the shoulder and he said, many ships come into port. That was their answer. So why shouldn't I go to Ireland and find out about my ancestors there? Second, it was an archaeological tour. Well, I still got dirt under my fingernails. I've done some digging around La Crosse, the Native Americans. So I thought this would be very, very interesting. And of course, it was. Our tour went right through Carlow. My father said that's where the Nowlan name came from in Ireland. My goodness, my son and I dropped off the tour and walked into the museum and asked about our name, and that was just a lot of fun. And I can tell you about that if you want. Fourthly, there was an island, Skellig Michael, off the port of Magee by about 10 miles. George Bernard Shaw had been up on Skellig Michael. The monks had built oratories where they prayed, and they had been there for 1,200 years and had never been repaired. That's the way the monks built them. There are no monks there now. And I wanted to be up there. There were 500 steps up to the top of this bird sanctuary, an island out in the ocean. Well, I met and exceeded all of my objectives. Dad had said, this is the Irishman, Dad had said the Vikings came to Ireland, his heritage said, and they taught the Irish to use coins, because the Irish had only bartered before that. And then they taught them to live in cities. The Irish were a rural people. They did not live in cities or towns or villages. And after they lived in towns and had coins, he said the Vikings taxed them. Ha, ha, ha. And there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. Let's go on to our pictures. There is a land without snakes, a lush country with 40 shades of green. It rains every day and the sun shines every day. Well, that's what the Chamber of Commerce says. It's the size of West Virginia, and you're never more than 40 miles from the sea. These are the cliffs of Moore, County Clare. The land was volcanic in nature. Hot fires thrust limestone 700 feet above the level of the ocean. Then 15,000 years ago, a glacier left its impact. It scooped out the middle of the country, the interior, where it left a series of lakes. The coast was a place of mountains, sort of like a saucer. This is the lake country of County Killarney. Humans ventured into this land as the great glacier receded. They were hunter-gathering bands. We call them Stone Age people. They erected great stone edifices. So we call it the megalithic culture. 5,000 years ago, a revolution took place. Agriculture replaced the hunter-gathering style. Food surplus meant for the first time people could express their beliefs. These flat-top structures, dating nearly 6,000 years ago, dot the lush countryside. They are called dolmens, a Breton word meaning tabletop. This is Polnaborn dolmen, country Limerick, and it's would contain bones of the original ancestors. They are often located high up on a hillside, as if the dead farmer is surveying his farm estate that he knew. Dolmens come in several types and many sizes. Brown's dolmen, near County Carlow, near the city of Carlow, that our name hails from, has a capstone on top that weighs 100,000 ton estimate. Our guide said this dolmen had been excavated. 20 dolmens in the vicinity have been excavated. Some have contained human remains, broken pottery, beads, sometimes a stone axe or two. No gold, no treasure has ever been found. Then came Newgrange. This is the largest passage tomb in all of Europe. The people of Newgrange put stones, topped the stones 65 feet, and then put 40,000 ton of rock and dirt upon that passageway, and it's about halfway into this huge mound. You need a year's reservation to get into Newgrange and walk that 65 feet of tunnel. The dates of our trip were determined by the reservation we had. So you walk bent over, you don't want to be too big, and you walk back there 65 feet, halfway, where the burial chambers are in the middle of the mound. Our guide had a control, turned off all the lights, and it plunged us into total darkness. Then with a series of electric lights, she slowly turned the lights back on, beginning way at the entrance of the passageway, snaking up the passageway until it finally illuminated the burial chambers where we were. For every 15 minutes, December 21, the winter solstice, the sun creeps up that passageway and shines on the remains of the dead. If you want to be there on December 21, you have a 12-year wait before you can secure that date. Preference is given to old archaeologists. There's a window box built into the passage tomb. You can locate it just above where people walk in. My son John has just emerged. I wanted his picture just as he came into the daylight. And he said he just bumped his head on the roof as I took the picture. Ouch. I asked our freckle-faced guide afterwards, what did it mean for these ancient people to have the sunshine come up the darkness of the passageway and shine on their dead? There was no hesitation. She said, they believed in an afterlife. And I said, amen. Later, when I got home, I asked Frida, a farmer's daughter, what it means when the sun shines on you in the morning. And you can imagine what she said. She said, you get up and you go to work. Now, this is 100 years older, a century older than all of the great pyramids of Egypt. Newgrange is in the Boyne Valley, 30 miles north of Dublin. The great stone culture also built forts. This is the approach to the Black Fort. There are concentric rings that lead up to the main wall. Behind the wall is an enclosed area perched 600 feet above a drop into the ocean. Such forts reach back 2,500 years and more. The Black Fort is on the island of Inishmore. We are at the base of the Black Fort. Authorities estimate there were 30,000 forts in Ireland. In those days, the average age was 30 years. This is Stag Fort. There are round forts, hilltop forts, promontory forts, cliff forts, even one built in the middle of a lake, a Crannog fort. Stag Fort features steps up to the top of the inside wall where the defenders are. And after 2,500 years, the steps work just fine. Now, at about this time, 2,500 years ago, a dramatic invasion took place of Ireland. A race of warriors poured out of Central Europe and invaded Ireland. They replaced the race that were there. Either they annihilated them or merged with them. We don't know. These invaders loved music and dance, fast horses and strong drink. The Romans called them barbarians. They were energetic, restless, had their own religion. We call them Celts. These two redheads are from the Aran Islands, County Galway, where they still speak the mother tongue. 1,000 years later, another profound invasion and revolution took place. 1,500 years ago, under missionaries like St. Patrick, the Celtic Druid religion was overthrown for Christianity. The dramatic result is the unique high cross, Celtic high cross. The wild Celtic soul now used stone to build cathedrals, churches, abbeys, beehive monk oratories where they prayed. This is Clonmacnoise monastic complex, County Offaly. The Celtic version of Christianity had a radical monasticism that sought a contemplative life full of prayer and obedience. The monks sought isolated, remote places to pursue a very quiet life. Such was the monastery on an island 10 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean off County Kerry. Skellig Michael is a 712 foot rock that is a bird sanctuary. The early Christian monks built 500 steps to a small clearing where they built beehive huts and an oratory. The ocean waves looked rough. Our group talked it over. We had 10 miles of rough water, but it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and many of us voted, let's go. George Bernard Shaw said when he saw Skellig Michael, I tell you this thing does not belong to any world that you and I have lived and worked in. It is a part of the dream world. 10-foot waves meant Skellig would disappear, then reappear, then disappear, and then reappear. I gave up my breakfast. People say you feed the fishes. Oh no. Those seagulls circling above, they spotted it and came down. They got my breakfast. Talk about quick food. So I got to Skellig Michael, shaking and shivering, weak as a pup. My son John gave me some orange juice from his belly pack. I recovered, and with each step, I felt better. But the wind howled, and there were no guardrails. A gust of wind took my hat and I grabbed it. And then I thought, I paid only $1 for that hat? I'm not putting it back on, and I stuffed it in my jacket. That evening back at our hotel, we heard about a lady, I think from Germany, who leaned out to look at the birds and fell to her death. Afterwards, my son said, "You know, Dad, what was the most dangerous thing?" And I said, "Those big waves." "No," he said, "the wind, just about blowing us off the steps," I said. "No," he said. "Okay," I said, "what was the most dangerous thing?" And John said, "There were no life vests on that little 30-foot boat." Now, these beehive huts have stood here for 1,200 years, ever since Christian monks in splendid isolation built them and prayed out their faith in them. Then came a movement out of the north. In 800 AD, the Vikings stormed out of Scandinavia, intent on plunder and riches and trade. They came to Skellig Michael also. A diorama back in Port McGee depicts monks being thrown off of the rock. One monk holds out his cross while the Viking unsheaths his sword. One account tells of the Vikings holding the abbot captive without food or water. And the chronicler says he died at the hands of the Vikings. Scholars now believe he was held for ransom. But these Irish monks on the island had nothing to give. Monasteries were easy targets for the Vikings. Some religious objects were very valuable. Unarmed monks didn't even put up a battle. The invasion routes are well documented. They chose river systems struck deep within the land, following rivers. Soon they wintered over, and they built fortifications against reprisal raids. Viking fortified settlements founded the cities of Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick. If you're Irish and come from those places, you probably have Viking blood. This Viking sword was unearthed from a Viking grave in Ireland. It's half again as long as any Irish sword from that period. They trace the main blade to the Ruhr Valley of Germany. Vikings used imported steel. In a Dublin museum, in another case, were smaller Irish swords of the same period, all broken. This is how an American historian, Margeson, visualizes a Viking warrior. They worshiped the gods Thor and Odin and Loki, cruel gods who were capricious tyrants. Death was usual. Life was cheap. For over 300 years, the Christians of Europe had prayed, "From the fury of the Norsemen, O Lord, deliver us." Norsemen meaning men of the north. I've called them Vikings because that's how we know them by name. The Dublin Museum added another feature. The Vikings sported chainmail armor. They even developed a very narrow arrowhead that would pierce through chainmail in case the Irish caught on. The Vikings had superior weapons, but their real advantage was the dragon ship. It was seaworthy, highly maneuverable, a shallow draft. They'd row up a river, constantly startled any defensive maneuvers. They followed no set plan. So how do you have a counter plan? You can't. And then there was the berserker, shield wall, might lock against shield wall, and it became a shoving match. The first to fall back and make a break would pay a high price. The men who wore bear's clothing would emulate the maddened bear, and they would don a bear cap or hat, and they went berserk, and it was a fearful thing. Against trained men of war were farmers and peaceful monks. The gospel, after all, had been preached in Ireland for 400 years. Thou shalt not kill was a part of the message. The Vikings, on the other hand, believed if you died in battle, sword in your hand, a Valkyrie would swoop down and you were taken straight to Valhalla. This is the #1 symbol in all of Ireland that speaks of the Viking presence. It's called the Round Tower. Lookouts were posted to spot invading hordes of Vikings, and they still dot the landscape of Ireland. Irish monk scholars were translating Europe's great literature. In fact, they saved Western civilization during the Dark Ages. This lookout tower is at Clonmacnoise Monastery, where they wrote the Book of the Dun Cow. Monks fled to such round towers, took their loved ones and precious manuscripts. They pulled up the ladder behind them, closing the trap door. Vikings who couldn't understand a word of their language would burn the wooden insides. Monks and manuscripts perished. The Round Tower was the Irish reaction to the Norse raids on monasteries in the 10th and 11th century AD. These tapering buildings, over 100 feet high, served as watchtowers, belfries, repositories for church valuables, and as refuges for the community. The door, normally 15 to 20 feet above ground, was reached by a movable ladder, and the interior was divided into 4 or more stories. The present height of the tower is 110 feet. The level of the surroundings has been raised by burials, and the conical cap is missing. What's the modern attitude today towards the Vikings? This is an iron replica of a Viking dragon ship used as a bus stop on the River Liffey, downtown Dublin. Right behind me is a building devoted to what they call the Viking Adventure. We paid $6 a piece to get a ride aboard a Viking ship that docks at a Dublin village. Well, it really didn't sail, but it went up and down and sprayed you with water, so you thought you were sailing. Live actors in costume walk you through a village where an Irish girl has married a Viking. He's a silversmith. And the Irish Adventure features a full-scale dragon ship cut in half lengthwise. And it's near where 200,000 Viking artifacts have been unearthed. The sample village we visited is dated 900 AD. In such villages, the Vikings worked metal to manufacture spear points like these on display. They worked wood, especially trade items, like these kitchen utensils. One specialty was working with bone or antler. The Vikings made combs and needles of bone or antler. Someone said that was the plastic of their day. This amber jewelry was cut, polished, and mounted, a very valuable trade item. The raw amber has been traced to the Baltic countries, and it reveals a wide trading network. It was fascinating to see a carved wooden item dug up along the Liffey and having it designated Ringerike style. Another carved item dubbed Urnes style. These are regional names from Norway. Following the violent raids, these savage Vikings settled down showed their skills as craftsmen, smiths, traders. We entered Waterford, home of the very famous Waterford crystal, and the sign directs us to the riverfront, where archaeologists have dug up artifacts, where a Viking tower still stands, and a museum proudly displays artifacts, maps, diagrams, charts of Viking Waterford. Or do we rather pronounce it Waterfjord? This is our friendly guide, Jack. He said two very interesting things. First of all, they excavated 2,000 skeletons from the Viking graveyard. Forget the tall, blonde warrior you usually envision. He said they averaged 4 foot 8 inches. Their teeth pointed in every direction of the compass. And I don't know how he knew this other detail. He said they only washed when they fell overboard. And then Jack grimaced. He didn't want to say it, but I mean, after all, he's a guide and he should tell the truth. He was real reluctant, but he said the Irish girls kept coming in from the country to marry them. And he added, doesn't say much for our Irish lads now, does it? Secondly, the Vikings first came as raiders in 850 AD. 10 years later, in 860 AD, they had settled down as smiths, craftsmen, and were marrying all those Irish girls that came in from the country. Then by 980, 130 years after their first raids, they built St. Olaf's Christian church in Ireland. This is Ragnars Tower. The Irish couldn't pronounce Ragnald, so it becomes Reginald. It's part of an original Viking fort. The tower has been in constant use for 1,200 years. Built so well, they said English cannonballs bounced off of it. We ate at a very nice restaurant behind the tower, right along a brick wall from the old fort. There are long lists of English names for people and city and items that originally came from Viking names, like Reginald from Ragnar. After intermarrying, the Vikings became embroiled in local Irish politics. They went to war, joining forces with the Irish, and sometimes the people they fought were Irish with Vikings in their military. They came for easy wealth. This is gold from a hoard found in modern times. No way to determine when the hoard was buried. Conceivably, it could have been buried to keep it out of Viking hands. The Vikings contributed to the Irish. Better weapons, great navigational skills. When the Vikings wintered over and built forts and founded cities, they gave the rural Irish the idea of living in cities. The Vikings shared their expertise in working with wood, silver, gold, iron, leather, bone, antler, and amber. Along with the trading items came a whole new trading network. History also credits the Vikings with giving the Irish trousers, coins, and a knowledge of constructing some buildings. Now, the bloodthirsty Vikings from Norway reacted to the gospel of God's love, the peace in Christ, with a unique wooden structure, the stave church. It's like a ship built for heaven. The pilot is Christ. Rations are bread and wine. Believers are the crew. Home port is heaven. The wild Irish spirit reacted to the gospel with the unique stone cross, the Celtic cross. In this exchange, the Irish gave the Vikings a warm climate, green grass, a love of learning, an atmosphere where God's care and love is more recognizable, to say nothing about all those Irish girls who kept coming in from the country. Let the Dublin Ride and the village that is restored give us the modern attitude with its title, The Viking Adventure. I accomplished my 4 objectives. I exceeded them beyond expectations. My son John was with me, and he's handing on the tradition to our grandson. John says, "Yes, Zachary, we were there and Grandpa is correct. The Irish are just shipwrecked Norwegians." And Zachary asks, "Is that why the Irish fight so much, Uncle John?" And John says, "It might just be, Zachary, it might just be." 'Tis the truth. Me father was an Irishman and mighty proud of it too. For the old sod has given birth to poets and playwrights and folklore.
Yeah, sure. And all my people came from the heartland of Norway, from Telemark, from the cultural elite peasantry, where art was always a part of life.
Immigration. Famine and hardship caused so many people to leave for America that there are more people here who claim Irish ancestry than there are in Ireland.
Famine and overpopulation caused many to leave Norway as well. There are more people who claim Norwegian ancestry in the United States than there are in Norway.
Ireland lost a larger percentage of its population to immigration than any other European country.
And Norway is second only to Ireland in losing a large percentage of population to immigration.
Water. Ireland is surrounded by water, and by necessity, they turn to the sea.
Norway has a long coastline and little tillable soil, so Norwegians also turn to the sea for food and exploration.
Boats. The Irish very early developed their own unique skin boat, the curragh, and Brendan the Navigator, a 6th century monk, sailed across the Atlantic to the Americas.
The Vikings developed their own unique clinker-built dragon ship, and Leif Erikson and others landed in Newfoundland 1,000 years ago.
Modern voyages. Tim Severin built a curragh like Brendan's and followed that 6th century journey in modern times, showing it was indeed possible.
There have been several copies of authentic Viking ships built and sailed across the Atlantic in modern times.
Patron saints. Ireland has a famous patron saint, the brave St. Patrick, who brought Christianity to Ireland. He is celebrated in song and pageant and a yearly holiday.
Norway honors St. Olaf as the man who brought Christianity to the Vikings. We celebrate him in America by naming towns and colleges and churches after him.
Religious symbols. Ireland has incorporated her pagan past in the distinctive Celtic cross. The inner circle represents the Druid worship of the sun. Irish scholars tell us, well, you know, that was our first try.
When Norway converted to Christianity, at least 1,000 distinctive stave churches were built. The pagan dragon head appeared along with the Christian cross on many of the early churches.
Little people. Ireland boasts of little people called leprechauns and fairies, and the people had a superstitious nature.
Norway had its mountain trolls and Nissa, and also has many accounts of how superstitions affected people.
sense of humor. The people of Ireland have a delightful sense of humor, even incorporating the name of their saint in their jokes, Pat says to Mike.
No one can doubt Norwegians' superior ability to laugh at themselves in a healthy way, also using their saint's name, as in, so Oli says to Lina. And the only ethnic comic strip features Hagar the Horrible, a hapless Viking, and we later-day Norwegians do not march and demonstrate and protest that our forebears are being made fun of.
We thank you.